Hey everyone, I really do hope that you've been enjoying these videos on my book, Fellowship of Suffering. Last week we finally got into the wonderfully optimistic topic of healing, and I talked a little bit about how healing is very much possible, but we have to consider both sides of our being, not just our material, physical sides, but also our spiritual sides. We need both in order to move forward in our healing process. But today I wanted to start getting into the more practical means of healing. And this is going to really begin the talk that this whole book is about. So the title of my book is Fellowship of Suffering. And the reason why I wrote that title is because I really, truly, and genuinely believe that healing, true healing in the mind and in the heart, can only happen within a community. There needs to be a fellowship that enables us to suffer, that enables us to not only make it through suffering, but to actually thrive in suffering. And this is something that I've known ever since I came back from Afghanistan at one level or another, but I've just never been able to articulate it properly until I read some of the writings of this guy named Sebastian Junger. Sebastian Junger was a wartime journalist. He did a documentary on Restrepo, which is a base in northern Afghanistan. And after coming back, he had some of the same insights and theories and perspectives that I had when I came back, where he couldn't understand why it was that veterans going through this horrendous experience of war, why would they prefer warfare to peacetime? And this is what I saw with me and my friends. We would go and we would be in Afghanistan, this horrible place where we didn't have hardly any food, we didn't have enough water, we were living in holes that we dug in the ground, we didn't have electricity, we didn't have our family, we didn't have our friends, and yet on my first firefight that I got into, I saw my buddy Green get shot 4 times, twice in the back, sappy, meaning it hit his body armor, and then 2 times in his actual back. He did a month in the hospital, came back and started patrolling with us again. My buddy Larson got blown up. He, to this day, walks with a cane, and yet after getting blown up, he went back to patrolling with us just a couple days later. My buddy Kalepsik got blown up, got a piece of shrapnel in his kneecap. Spent a couple weeks away, then came back and was patrolling again. When I got shot, I didn't even spend an hour after I got shot before I went back onto post, and I continued to go back on patrol. I didn't get injured, which is why I didn't have to take the time off, but still, I was offered a time to mentally recover, and I refused it. What is it in these people, what is it in me that caused us to want to go back into combat, to want to go back into the fray when people were giving us an out? And what I found is that we preferred combat, not because combat had become pleasurable to us, but because the fellowship that we garnered in that combat situation was something that none of us had ever experienced. We grow up in a very individualistic society, a society where people don't really know each other. They don't know who their neighbors are. They make friends in school, but then they move to another school. They make friends in a city, and then they move to another city. You go to a job, you feel completely unnecessary. The boss doesn't even know your name. You know some coworkers, but outside of work, you barely can get a word in edgewise. You can't hang out with people. You text people, but your face-to-face conversations rarely ever happen. You have social media, but once again, the deep connections that people need, they're not being given to you in these types of communications. And we had found this deep tribal-like community with one another. We slept with one another. We ate with one another. We fought with one another. We cried with one another. We had everything in common. We shared everything. And it was a level of intimacy that, like I said, I hadn't known ever since I was a little kid, and the intimacy I had with my parents. And it was something that my soul greatly needed. And that is why Sebastian Junger noted that the majority of people don't get the full setting of PTSD until they come home from combat. And that's exactly what I witnessed too. Why? Well, after garnering this deep community that we all enjoyed with one another, we were dispersed. I went to Tucson, some of my friends went to Phoenix, they went to Florida, they went to California, they went to Washington, they went to Oregon, they went all over the country. And we lost the community that we had literally fought to gain. And we went back to homes and to cities that we no longer really understood, and they no longer really understood us. We felt like strangers in our own houses. The things that I shared with people, they didn't get. I was misunderstood. I was miscategorized. I felt like I didn't belong anymore. And not only that, but the country as a whole is divided. The level of contempt that we speak towards one another, especially on social media, is so grotesque that you look at it and you're like, how can people exist like this? It just seems so divided. It seems so divisive. And it breaks something in you. And in that alienation and in that isolation and that breaking, the wounds that you incurred months ago will start to fester. They'll start to grow. They'll start to deepen. And that's when PTSD starts taking root and starts really taking over you. So in order to prove this theory, Sebastian Junger went around the world and he studied tribal cultures that are in far more brutal combat than we are in. And even studied ancient cultures, tribal cultures. And what he found over and over again is that these tribal cultures, they do not have the same psychological problems that we have. Although anxiety disorders and depression, things like that, they exist, they're not near as debilitating for these cultures. And in fact, a lot of these cultures that he talked to, they don't even have a word for PTSD. They don't even know what it is. It's not that they're not going through trauma. It's not that they're not suffering. It's that their communal-based healing is so great, it's so powerful, that these people almost never get PTSD. They're able to process their trauma inside of their community in such a powerful, practical, and beneficial way that they never get it. And that's radical. That was something that blew him away. He couldn't understand why this was happening. And in fact, in his book, he writes this. He says, as affluence and urbanization rise in a society, rates of depression and suicide tend to go up rather than down. He noted that these societies that have far more reasons than us to be depressed and sad and traumatized are less depressed, they're less sad, they're less suicidal, they're less anxious, and they're less traumatized than us. Why? Because they have, not it's that they have less of these things, but they have more of a reason or more of a resource to be able to heal from these things. And we've lost it. In our individualistic culture, in our individualistic society, we have lost the greatest resource that God has ever given to us to be able to heal, to be able to move forward, to be able to move on. And when you think about it, even the healing process can be very narcissistic and very individualistic in the way it's described in our culture. People come home, they come back from trauma, and what is suggested to them? Go to a counselor. Right? Now, there's nothing wrong with therapy. There's nothing wrong with counselors. You guys know that I've talked about this before. However, think about this for a second. You're going to talk to a stranger who you don't know, didn't grow up with you, didn't experience any of these things with you. You're paying them for your time. You're seeing them for 1 hour, maybe once a week if you're lucky, but usually it's once a month. And they're usually listening to you for a little bit of time. They send you on your way. They may give you some medication, but they don't know you. They don't care about you in that deep personal way. It's their job. And yet, the people that you know the most, your friends, your family, the people you grew up with, the people that you live with, they don't even know the things that you've shared with this stranger. That should strike you as odd. That should strike you as weird. Why is it that we have more comfort with this stranger than we have with our own friends and family? Could it be that it's once again this culture that we've garnered in America, this culture where it's you got your problems, I got my problems. I'm going to work on my problems, you work on your problems, and hopefully we'll meet in the middle somewhere. We don't even want to help one another out, and we don't even know how to do it. We don't know how to reach out to people who are hurting. It's usually when people are hurting that we give them space, and usually when we're hurting, the first instinct that we have is to get space for ourselves. We say, I'm going to go alone. See, when I was in the Marines, we didn't have that choice. When we were struggling, we couldn't be alone. We couldn't leave. We were always around people. We suffered together. And it was that joint communal suffering that enabled us to be able to function even in the hell of combat. And we lost it. And what we need to understand as a society is that unless we can garner this same level of community that he describes in his book, we might be lost too. No matter how great the methods and the resources that we've created inside of our society, they seem to not be enough. There seems to be something missing. Now, in my next videos, I'm going to talk more and more about this type of tribal communal living that we need to garner and how to do it in a practical way. But before this video ends, I do want to leave you guys with one thing. In Proverbs 14, verse 10, and by the way, the book of Proverbs was written in a tribal community, the very community that Sebastian Junger was writing about. And in this tribal community, the author of Proverbs says this: a heart knows its own merriment, and a stranger cannot share its bitterness. Now this is what he's saying. He's saying no matter how close you get to somebody, no matter how deep your community is, there's a level that they can never understand you. They're never going to get exactly what you've been through. And if you're listening to this right now and you're a veteran, even if you have 99% of the same exact experiences as me, there's still going to be that 1% that we don't understand one another. You're going to process your trauma in a different way than me. You're going to think about it in a different way than me. We are different people. There's a level that your friends and family will never be able to understand you. Beyond that, if you have that selfish view of like, well, if I need a community to heal, then I'm going to garner community in order to heal. That's a very selfish mentality. That's not a communal mindset. That's a selfish, individualistic mindset. And because of that, you're going to lean on people and blame people when your healing doesn't go the way that you want. But what the writer of Proverbs is getting at is he's driving at this point. Why is it that God is so necessary for our healing? Well, later on in the same book, he says, a man does not understand his own way, for his footsteps are of the Lord. And what he means by that is he says, deep down, guess what? You don't even understand you. You don't even understand why you do the things that you do, why you react the way that you do, what you've really been through, what you're really going through, what you really feel. So much of it has been shut out by your subconscious mind. But he says, but there's one person in this universe who really does understand you and whose love really could make you complete, could really heal you. And he says, it's God. God directs your footsteps. God knows who you are. And therefore, God is absolutely essential to this deep level of healing that we're talking about. God is described in Isaiah chapter 9 as being our wonderful counselor. He is the person, he is the friend that sticks closer than a brother. In Christianity, we believe that we have a deep, intimate community with God himself. And it is from this community and the healing that we gain from that we can then take our lives and spread it outward to build the kind of communities that we need and that others need so that we can heal together. And it begins with God. So again, in my future videos, I'll talk about how to build that community with God, because even if you are saved, it doesn't mean you've ever built this type of intimate relationship with God. You might be treating him the same way that you treat everyone else in your life. You only see him maybe once a week when you go to church. You only talk to him every now and then when things get tough. And you don't really know him the way that he intends for you to know him. And you don't really understand the deep care that he has for you in the way that you need to. These are things that we're going to get into later. But for now, I just wanted to leave you with that one simple perspective. Do you have that community with God? And if you don't, are you willing to look for it? I'll talk to you guys soon. Hey, this is Peter Martin, and if you've just finished this video, that means that you've watched one in a longer playlist on my new book called Fellowship of Suffering. This book deals with trauma and PTSD and how these things impact all of us. So if you've liked this video, please give it a like, please subscribe to my channel, and look forward to more content.